excited you are here. We're excited. I'm just generally excited. Hey, before we get started with what we're doing today, which is some work on Kodu Game Lab, I did want to plug right off the top. Speaking of coding and game design, that Brad Schreffler's new show, Unscripted, is today at 1:00 right here on the live stream, 1:00 Eastern time. I should mention that. So if you're not watching, following, subscribing, all of those, whatever those things are that you do on Twitch that the kids do that so that you get a notification when it goes live. We're excited to get started. And it's so much fun. We are everywhere doing all of the things. The Fortnite lesson plans came out yesterday, apparently.
Oh,
did you?
Nice.
Yeah, see, you didn't even know, and I didn't even know. And that is so crazy to me.
So where are they live? We should share that.
I saw it on LinkedIn and I shared it. I was
really,
like, oh, so my lesson plan is on the Epic Games website. That's pretty cool.
Wait, do you have a link?
Yeah, give me a second. I'll pull it up because it was pretty exciting to see.
Yeah. While you're doing that,
I was like,
oh, that's
awesome.
Look at this. Finally. Okay, cool. Right? Hey, you like the backwards cap? Thanks. I had it on frontwards first, and there's something about the camera where the words on it, I don't know if it's the way I'm looking at the camera, but it just wasn't working for me. So thanks, Nick. I'm glad I got the okay on the backward cap. I'm not usually a backward cap guy. But we're going to get going with Chris in a second with Kodu. And I'll just share, my excitement around this as well is that, I've been teaching game design for quite some time. And when I started, Kodu Game Lab was kind of either new on the scene or a couple years into my, class, it came onto the scene. My problem with it back then, and I'm always excited to revisit it because I kind of forget about it sometimes. But at that time, and I don't know, Chris, if you remember it this way, but for me, it was exciting that it was both on the Xbox and the computer. However, when I started having kids make games in Kodu, they would put let's say a bunch of trees in, and the way it handled trees and things was not ideal because each one was a whole, not instance, an instance would be good, a whole object, I guess you'd call it, where they each took up the amount of memory that a tree, let's say, would take up. So once my kids started creating these environments, all of a sudden their game got super laggy. It just couldn't handle it back then. But technology's come a long way. I'm sitting in front of a much better computer now than I did then. So I'm excited to see, to revisit it, like I said. And I was so glad when Chris sent me a message and said, hey, I'd love to do something with you guys on game design, and Kodu seemed like the perfect fit. So thank you for joining us.
No, I'm happy to be here. I'm super excited because I use this program with my elementary students. I've used it, the lowest grade I've used this with so far is 4th grade. I think I could probably push it down to 3rd grade, given really teaching them some of the UI elements. And that's going to be kind of an important part of the conversation as we talk about using this with game design is what is kind of the UI like? Is it tricky to use? Stuff like that. Because it looks very clean, but there are a lot of things kind of hidden in the background that you might need to tweak to have the best experience. Like you said, with computers, there are definitely some things that you can tweak to make it a lot easier to run on some of the older PC machines. So if you're a district that has PCs, they're just a little dated, you can still get use out of this as long as you kind of tweak a couple of settings kind of in the background. So gotcha. I'm super excited to jump in and kind of walk through this and share how I use this for computer science and everything. So if you guys don't mind, I'm just going to jump in with a new world. Is that all right?
Absolutely.
All right, perfect.
And while you're at that, the screen that Mike is showing, and I'm super excited to see that. We've been working with Epic Games for quite some time, developing lesson plans for interactive 3D using tools like Fortnite Creative, Unreal Engine, and Twinmotion. And we've been anxiously awaiting the launch of the website that was going to include these lesson plans. So I have, I think, a couple, at least one on there, but Mike has.
So I saw
three.
your Rube Goldberg is there, and this alternative ending is.
Oh, how funny!
On it as
now
well.
That's awesome, because I was looking at that when you first showed it. I'm like, that's a cool graphic there, and I didn't realize that was my lesson.
Yeah, it is a good graphic.
So that's cool.
And then my what's this one? Sustainable Park.
That's a Twin Motion. That's a great one.
And then this one's mine.
Okay, cool. Now, are there others, or are those the only ones that are on there at the moment?
Looks like right now there's 6.
Okay, cool. It's a great start. All right. Well, look for more, and Mike dropped that link in there. So I'm sure we're going to be tweeting the heck out of that, right, Mike?
I tweeted about it this morning. I was pretty excited to see it. I was,
wow, that's
awesome.
I
didn't know it was coming. So it was exciting to see my lesson plan and, a graphic,
looks
a cool
great.
Fortnite graphic. And
it does look awesome.
Yeah. And then when you click download, it takes you to the actual lesson plan with all of the information and all tied to standards.
Yep.
It's almost like I was a teacher and I knew.
Yeah. and we did really go out of our way with these to keep them very simple and easily either turnkey or something that a teacher could take and say, I like that idea. Let me modify it a little. But really, they're intended to be very, kind of easy to bring into your classroom. So I hope that triggers a whole new generation of educators starting to use some of these tools. So anyway,
I'm super pumped to see, I would love people to use these and then send us screenshots or video of them using this in their class or what students have done with them. That's out of everything, that's what I'm excited about the most, is someone tagging me, look what the kids did with your lesson, that kind of stuff. I'm
absolutely. Maybe it means we're due to have an episode that talks a little about, again, these tools, show some examples too and stuff like that. So let's keep that on the back burner or the front burner as well. But anyway.
Awesome. All right, let's get into Kodu.
Yes.
All right. So I loaded up just a fresh world. So we're going to start from scratch on this. Down here at the bottom, you can kind of see the UI elements. Very clean, but there are a lot of little hidden things in them that the kids are going to use to build their game and also use for programming. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to use the paintbrush, and I'm going to select kind of what I want my game space to look like. And there are so many different options for what you want your space to look like. I'm going to go with kind of a little snowy, and it's as simple as painting. So I can either choose to left click once to kind of set the tile, or I can hold it down and kind of swish it around to kind of build a little space. Okay. So I'm not going to make it too big to start. We're going to do something just super simple, just to kind of showcase off all the different tools we can use. Looks kind of flat though, right? Right now. So let's go ahead and use our up-down tool to kind of make some hills and valleys. Now, right now, my paintbrush is kind of small, but if I hit the left and right arrow keys, I can either make that paintbrush super small or super huge. So I can raise the level of this whole world if I want right now, and I can choose to make the brush smaller and kind of push down a little bit so I can create some hills and valleys going on. So this, once you combine all these tools together, is really how you get creative with your game design and game space of the world, right? So now that I've kind of given some dimension to my world a little bit, let's go ahead and pluck a character in there. So I'm going to go to the object tool, which is just the robot head. And you actually get this big wheel of selection that you can choose from. So like Steve mentioned earlier with the trees, you can go ahead and choose trees and kind of pluck them in there. And they are quite large.
Yeah,
if you
they look different than I remember from years ago, but that's cool.
So what you can do if something is too big, you can actually go in there and just directly change the size. So I can just make a tiny little tree out of this, so it's not quite so huge. But what you have the option of doing with all these different objects is, depending on the type of game that the student's trying to create, they have a lot of different options. So like if you want to make a collection type game, your students might opt to put a bunch of apples kind of spread out and turn it into almost like a coin collection type game. Or you can opt to only have, maybe they decide to make a game where they want to just defeat all the enemies. So they have like cannons that will shoot at you. They have little fly fish. They have jet airplanes. I mean, there's a lot of variety depending on what the student wants to do and what type of game they want to build. They also have like submarines and saucers, because if you choose to, you can make a little underwater game. I mean, there are a lot of different avenues and creative outlets for your students, depending on what their interests are. Like I had a ton of students want to try and just do an underwater game. And I was like, fabulous, go for it. Let me see what you can come up with. I leave my lessons for this are very open-ended, to where I want to place the least amount of restrictions on my students as possible, because I want the creativity to be just as high as I can have it, while still getting out of it what I need as far as curriculum goes.
You're speaking my language there.
Yeah. So let's see. Let's go ahead, and we're just going to do just a simple track.
Chris, how large is the possible game world?
How large is it? That all depends on how much you want to put in it. I can zoom out pretty far, and I can make this tile pretty much stretch across the entire world if I want. So like I can pluck down a bit, and it will actually enlarge my world too. So the max seems to be about right here, and you'll see this little dial on the side. You see how it kind of went up a little bit? It filled up green a little bit. So this is kind of how Kodu is like, hey, if you don't want to crash your machine, you might want to pay attention to this little dial on the side, because as it fills up, is going to tax your resources on your computer. Now, there are ways around this, because I've had some really good computers this still fill up, and I'm like, there's no way that my computer can't handle more than what this is showing me. So there is a setting you can actually go in and tweak and turn this off, to where you can be like, okay, I think my machine can handle more than what you're saying, so I'm going to go ahead and turn the setting off.
Only because I think it's worth mentioning that this was developed quite a while ago.
Oh yeah,
like this isn't a new program.
No.
Kodu has been around for, at least in my memory, 5 or 6 years at least.
At least.
I think this is 10 or 11 years old. I think so. If I'm dating myself right. I think so. This is like 10-year-old software that they've improved over time.
Right.
Are they still? Do you know if the team is still actively like working on it? Like,
I don't think they are.
I know that they are doing updates. Usually they're about 5 or 6 updates yearly.
Okay.
A lot of that seems to be more language support. So they really have been branching out as far as supporting other languages and things like that. So,
yeah. Because I was kind of sad when they abandoned Project Spark, which I was also excited about.
Yeah, I did not get the chance to use Project Spark with my kiddos, which was very sad, because I loved what they were doing with it.
Yeah, and that's where I learned about Kodu as well, was the Project Spark idea, because that came in with quite a bit of fanfare. I think they even announced it at like E3, the one year that like they made a big deal about it. So
I was so excited about it.
Yeah.
But
this is kind of the outcome of what's left of that.
Yeah, although this did come first. I mean, it was interesting how they were 2 completely separate projects. But you're right. At least this is what they decided to keep their energy.
And you can tell that this looks just a little dated compared to what we have available now, but it is still there's still a lot here as far as what you can provide the student and their creativity. So what I'm going to do is you can actually see how big this really is because I plopped a cycle down and it is very tiny when you zoom out and look at the whole map. So I'm actually going to zoom in and we're going to take a look at what the programming screen kind of has to offer here. Because there's a lot in terms of the thinking behind the programming. So they have it very simplified into a win and do section. Now, most elementary programming avenues usually will typically use Scratch Junior or Scratch, or they'll use code.org uses their Blockly language, as well as CoBlocks uses like a CoBlockly language. So it's very block based. It's visual. They've simplified the syntax of the blocks to make it easy for kids to understand. But even though it's visual in block form, there's a lot of thinking behind, okay, what does this block really do? And how do I really use it? And in a lot of cases, when you're starting out with teaching students about computational thinking and programming and sequential thinking and all that, it's very hard still for young elementary students to translate those blocks into what they actually want to do. And that's where Kodu does something very unique and different that I find very fascinating. And a lot of my, like I said, my fourth graders can really look at what they have to offer and jump right in and figure out exactly what they want out of the game they want to make. So I'm going to go ahead with the win side. We're actually going to set up the controls to move this cycle around. So a lot of demoing that I do with this with my kiddos is we really talk about like, what do we want out of games? What are some of the common languages that we use between the games? Well, one of them has to do with the controls. Since we use a lot of mouse and keyboard in the lab, we don't really have access to gamepads. So I say we're going to leave the gamepad alone for now. So let's talk about keyboard. Well, what are ways that we control our characters? And they'll tell me, well, usually we control it with like WASD or the arrow keys. So I say that's how we're going to build our controls. I said we're going to select the keyboard. We know that we're going to use the arrows or WASD. So it's personal preference, whatever you guys would like. And then what is typically happening when we press those keys? And then they'll respond, well, we move. And I'm like, well, perfect. There's a move right here. So even with just this simple sequential thinking of, when I press a key, what is happening? It is very visual for these kids. So they'll know exactly right away. So when I go in here and I press play now, they know exactly right away. Actually, I need to change one thing with this. You can actually make it quick or slow. I'm going to make it quick just because the world is huge and I want to be able to navigate around it just to kind of showcase it off. So now I've got movement, right?
Wait, so when you added those extra quicklies, was that like a multiplier in a sense?
Yeah, it's a multiplier. So look, I'm demonstrating kind of how fast I can move now. I'm going to take those quicklies away and you'll see how much slower I actually go. So I'm going to take all those out. And now when I move much slower.
That's interesting. Right? So it doesn't use it like a variable, like quickly, like 5, whatever. It's just each one is that's interesting.
So here's the great part about that. It actually does that too. But as far as not wanting to overwhelm students too bad, I tend to start with the adding more quicklies because that's like a quantifiable thing for them. Yeah, They're like, totally. Well, if I have 3 quicklies, that's going to be way faster than just move.
No, right? I like that. Yeah, that's
so
good.
What I can do from here, though, like even if I have those quicklies in here, I can jump into the actual character settings. So I can go to change settings, and there are my multipliers.
Oh,
so
interesting.
I can tweak these too. This is for once my kiddos are comfortable with using the software and understanding kind of what all that language means. So ideally, I start with my 3 quicklies or my 1 quickly, just depending on how fast they want to go. And when they're comfortable with the concept of being able to control and manipulate that character the way that they want, well, now I can be like, well, if you want to get really in the nitty gritty, guys, you can go in here and really play with these speed multipliers.
And I'm guessing, like, what was kind of cool too that I like is that when you did the keyboard movement, the WAS and D, it was smart enough to say, hey, most people are going to use this. We don't have to program forward, left, right, back.
Yeah.
I guess we could if we wanted to do something different. Okay, that's neat.
So, and that's where I like how it kind of takes itself apart from Scratch, because Scratch is very much you are programming each and every key, and you need to have it set up that way in order to have full movement. Whereas with this, I don't need quite as much on my front end to get my character to respond how I want, because
that UI there, when you the menu UI, that's actually what shows the how dated.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't think anyone would design an application with a UI that looks like that anymore.
And it's so funny because there is so many different options. If I scroll down, that it can be so overwhelming for kids. So I try to shy away from this too much.
You could also see how, this kind of like Project Spark, because it was able to be used, I think, on the Xbox, you can kind of get the sense of how people would use it with the game controller, which is how it was designed, instead of assuming that you're going to use the keyboard and make your game that way.
Right. So, like I said, there are so many options here, and I don't necessarily restrict my students. I make them aware that it is here. Part of what my game design that I want them to get out of it is changing some of the simpler things in this. Now, that could be as simple as making sure that you show health for your character. So I know, like, if I'm 1 hit away from dying in the game, I want to be aware of that. And we talk about why that's a good game design element to kind of show off depending on the game you're making. So I typically don't have them scroll all the way down and really focus on some of these more complex settings. So I just kind of show them some speed multipliers, some health if they want to tweak their health and that kind of thing, and kind of call it a day. But as far as I know that Steve focuses more on like the game design aspects, there are tons of things that influence the design of the game in the settings. And I'm sure that they've probably updated and relinquished more control of those settings over their 10-year lifespan. So there is a lot here if you are primarily focusing on game design. And let's make this a little bit more complicated. So now that I have movement in my character, we're going to talk about another simple setting that characters tend to do in these 3D games is anybody that's played Mario knows that we like to jump. So when I go in here, we're obviously not using arrows or WASD, so we have to think a little bit. And I tell them commonly spacebar is most commonly used thing for jumping. And I say, but you can make it whatever you want. This is your game, guys. And I have each one of my students is making an individual game. This is not like a co-op effort. I could do it that way if I wanted, but everybody is super jazzed at this point that they all have their idea for their own game. And I'm like, for sure, you guys are going to dive in, because one of the neat things that goes on in this process that I'm sure Steve can attest to is once these kids start and they struggle with that internal figuring out how they want all this to lay out, you've got their 5 friends in the background checking their game out, giving them advice, be like, oh yeah, that would be really cool. I actually know how to do that. I just figured out how to do that in my game. Do you want me to show you how that programming looks for your game? And that's what gets all that conversation going and that feedback loop between the students, to where I'm just usually an observer when all this is going on. If I have someone that's really struggling, I'll jump in, I'll see what their game's about, and we'll have a conversation about what all this sequential and conditional thinking looks like to get them to have their character perform the way that they want. But a lot of that thinking is on their end. I'm just prompting them like, okay, well, what key on the keyboard do you want to use for this? Are you wanting to make like a jump pad? Because that's going to look a little bit different than just making a button press on the keyboard.
The collaborative aspect of game design for students is by far the most powerful pedagogical aspect, I think, of game design, in the sense that students are experts at video games. A lot of them are anyways. And I used to remind them of that all the time, that our kids are experts at video games. They know what good games look like. They know what good games feel like. They know the difference between a good game and a bad game in almost every aspect too, not just in the gameplay, but in the way games look, the way games sound, the way games feel, and even difficulty level. So what better way to not just foster like that collaboration and communication aspect, but then to have them work with each other, to critique each other's games. It gives them the chance to show leadership. It gives them the chance to be critical without being, critical. Providing feedback. Peer review was like a giant part of my game design program. We called them, we had an alpha test,
Yep.
and we had a beta test, and that's what we called it, because those are the terms that the kids know. The kids know what a beta test is, and they know what an alpha test is. And so like my game design program was from September to June. So in like January or February, we had an alpha test where kids had to make a vertical slice, which is another another game design term. Right. And then they tested that. And then we had a beta test in May, just before they release their game. And kids know what these terms are, and they're the best possible people to collaborate with other kids, in terms of like, I would rather just let them work with each other than me trying to step in and kind of exert control or anything like that over the process. Let them collaborate with each other, like that idea of them standing over each other's shoulders and kind of saying, or here, have a seat and play this for me and let me know what you think. That's like incredibly powerful in this whole conversation.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
like I said, I try to take as much of a backseat as I possibly can. They have some ground rules over kind of the expectations, but I try to let them run with it as much as possible. I'm like, guys, do not ask me for anything unless you really, really need it, because I just want to watch this process of you all just be engaged and jump in. And I train my students from a very young age that failure is an okay thing, and it's okay to struggle to figure out how to get it to perform exactly how you want. And by the time we're ready for Kodu, like in that third, fourth grade age level, they understand that. So they know that I am not going to just jump in and bail them out when they get stuck, that they need to rely on this whole sequential thinking and thinking it out, but also relying on their other classmates to help them out.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
So what I did is I went ahead and just created a new obstacle for us. I made a cannon. And when we talk about back to game design elements, you can see that I added line of sight in here. That's super important, because if we don't have that in there, the cannon's going to be able to shoot me no matter if it can truly see me or not. So again, with the whole refinement and control over the design of my game, is when we add these elements, like we know, but until we see them like in a programming aspect, we just assume that they're going to perform the way we know until we get like that rude awakening surprise. So right now I've got it set to that. So if I did it right, he shouldn't shoot me unless I'm going to move him a little bit so he's totally in front of me. So he should not shoot me, hopefully, from the back. And he does. So I might have to go in there and fine tune him a little bit. Let's see. And again, when we talk about game design elements and options, I mean, I can color code things. So if I only want him to shoot at a certain like blue character, or if I want him to be happy when he destroys a bot, I can definitely put all emotions or all that in if I want. Let me see. It might have to do with this. I can also control on what I want that missile to do. So if I want that missile to just stun someone, I can do that. If I definitely want that explosion, I want that boom in there. Maybe I just want to knock him out. I mean, there are so many options for control over what the kids want out of their game to give variety, because obviously you want those dangerous enemies in there, but maybe you want an enemy that just makes it really annoying for you to play the game if you mess up. So it's all super dependent. One of my favorite games my students made was actually very simple in practice, but complicated in how he set up the control schemes. So I'm going to try and illustrate it a little bit with the world I have real quick, actually. So he actually had 4 characters that you controlled at once, and he had them moving on various speeds. And your goal was you had to get them in these tiny little holes to win the game. And he had holes about this big. So and he had a time limit too. So you had 30 seconds, and your goal was to manipulate 4 characters moving at 4 different speeds into these holes before the timer went out. And he didn't really have any external obstacles, you know what I mean? Like cannons or anything like that. But there's ways to set up timers in the game, and we can look at that too here in a second. But he just had like a 30-second timer. And in his instructions, it was just, you have 30 seconds to make your 4 characters fall in the holes. And that's it. And I thought that was brilliant because he did all of that on his own. Like, one of the things I let the kids do is, if there's a tool they're not really sure how to use, I let them use YouTube as a resource. We just talk about like how to properly search for what we're looking for on YouTube. Obviously, that's a conversation, but they can go see how other people have made their games and what language that they had to use for those games, and bring that to their game and figure out how to utilize that the best way that they envision in their head. And one of the things that I love about Kodu too is when you get in here and you program, and let's say you're a novice and this is somewhat overwhelming for you to jump in and do, there's actually an example button. And I wish Scratch would make some kind of extension, because I think it would make this a lot more beginner friendly for people to jump into Scratch or tools like Scratch, if they would make an extension that just suggested some different options for them to do. So if I hop in my win column and I press that Y button, I actually get examples of different things I can get that character to do. So when I don't see any Kodus, I end the game. And this is what I would use to build that. And I can actually directly insert it if I press A. So I can just import that language into my game. Now, it's not going to fit the game necessarily the way it's written, depending on what I want it to do. Like, I might have to say, if I don't see any blue Kodus, it just depends on what that student needs for their game. So while it does offer that option of like importing the code directly, the student has to take that and tweak it to fit what they want out of their game. So it's not just going to make the game for them. It's setting them up to be successful to where, okay, this is kind of what it looks like. Now I need to tweak this to fit what I want it to do in my game. And I think that's amazing, because when you have so many tools and so many options like this, I have a lot of kids that tend to get overwhelmed when they have too many options, right? So I say, well, let's look at the examples. Let's go through them, and maybe you'll find one that will jog what you want to turn your game into. So like when kids see like this, for example, when I see an apple move toward it, they think, okay, maybe I want to do like a collection type game. So I'll insert that, but instead of apples, let's do something else like coins. Okay. So now I've taken that and I've remixed it into getting what I want out of it. And I think that's a super powerful thing for a program to have, to make that ease of access, to be able to jump in there and get a lot out of it, even though you might be a novice game design or novice with the whole computational, sequential, conditional thinking, you know? So there are a lot of tools to let experts just roam and do whatever they want, but enough here that the novice can jump in and see examples of how all this stuff plays out and import it directly into their game, which I think is awesome. And I'm trying to see if I can get one of these other tools to work real quick. So one of the things that my kids love to do, there's two like of the most popular games my kids like to do. One of them is racing, and the other one is like those parkour maps. So very Mario-esque, where they have several different islands and you have to jump between all the islands. Sometimes you'll have enemies shooting at you. And the most common thing is, well, how do we set up our game like that? So I'm going to scrap this world real quick, and I'm going to do just a brand new world. I'm not even going to save this. Whoops. And actually, real quick at this screen, before I start a new one, if you are just starting this out, especially for the adults, just so you get a feel of how this works, they have done a phenomenal job of offering all kinds of tutorials of how to use these different tools. So if you are a teacher and this looks intimidating to you, I highly, highly suggest you run through some of these tutorials, because they take you screen by screen how to do a lot of these game design elements. And they also offer sample games for students to get a good grasp of what are different things that they can make. Like there are fishing games in here. There are some fortress defense. There was a really cool one released that simulated like the Mars rover. So you actually can hop on there and you can drive the rover around. In fact, let's just kind of take a look at it real quick. And I think that they collabed with NASA for this. So it was like a huge initiative to kind of promote this whole game thinking and using it to teach science and things like that. So there are lots of different avenues to use this for that might not necessarily be so strictly linked to game design. That's ideally what I've used it for, but there is a lot of room to build a lot of those things that you kind of see in Minecraft, where you see historical maps, you see chemistry in Minecraft, you see all different kinds of math concepts. You've got the programming integration with Minecraft now. So this is more, there is more here than just necessarily game design. Just like Minecraft, there's more there now than just a virtual world you build things in. There are so many applications you can go through with Kodu and also Minecraft now that you can really branch out your thinking. So if you wanted to, the teacher could create a whole experience and just have the kids download Kodu and jump in and experience that. If you wanted to, it all just depends on what your goals are for your students and what your goals are as far as what you teach.
Very cool. Of course, you could also, decide that the kids should be creating a similar experience, right? And that would be cool to co-create. Can you collaborate? I don't know if I missed this, but can you work with other people in the same world for development?
So the way that I've kind of manipulated that, there's no way that I know of to directly have multiple kids in the same game at the same time. I just don't. I don't know if they intended for the game to be like that.
Right.
But what you can do is you can go in here and you can do two things. You can either share with the community, and I think there's a way you can remix the world from there, or you can go to save my world, and it will actually save the file that you can put. The kids can put in like a Google Drive or whatever shared space that they have for files, and that way they can load up that world and maybe they tweak it and then save it and put it back in that folder.
Right. But so, they would be working one at a time in that case. I mean, like many tools are like that. Game Maker's the same. So I usually just limit the number of kids I would have in a group for a product like this. Whereas Minecraft, I just love how collaborative it is by nature.
Yeah, and that's part of like the whole, this is 10 years old, so that kind of limitation in place. Like you said, Minecraft is probably the most ideal example we have now as far as truly being able to have like that simultaneous collaboration, whereas a lot of tools like this are kind of like over the shoulder collaboration. And there's benefit to that too, but it's not anything like what you get out of Minecraft.
No, I mean, there's great value in paired programming and with the problem solving in something like this where, you're trying to do that logic. And at that point, working together, side by side is great. It just like what I find is, when I have kids work in groups for projects, when it's a tool like this where they have to be working that way, I usually limit it to groups of 2, where I wouldn't with Minecraft, or some products, if there is a graphic, like let's say you could import your own assets, then I might have a third person in a team who can be the graphic designer and create some of those. But I think everything you're using comes out of the built-in and then modified once it's in the game. Is that right?
Yeah. I don't think that they offered any like importing of assets.
Yeah, I don't think so either, because it, kind of would, in this case, would go away from the sort of the whole, way that the product, the game is, set up.
Right. And so one of the cool things that they offered, and I don't know how long ago it was, Steve, that you checked out Kodu last, but you can choose to have that blank world I have, but they also have some worlds kind of like already preset in like a very basic stage to give creators that are just doing this for the first time a way of kind of seeing how game space can play out and look like. And I think this is super helpful because I have various degrees of kids and their exposure to games and game design in general. So a lot of these kids are tackling this not having a lot of background knowledge. So it's very helpful for me to have these two kind of like sample preset options to kind of get the ball rolling for those kids on what they can create and what it could potentially look like, rather than just that blank slate. Because I have a lot of kids that can't necessarily operate on the blank slate, and they just need a little oomph behind what something should look like before they can like just dive in and start creating. So, and I think this was in one of their more recent updates that they put these kind of preset options in. So it is nice to see that they're still kind of updating it and thinking about that whole very beginner user-friendly experience where they might not be ready to just jump in and start from scratch. So at least gives them a little bit of content to build off of to kind of jump in and get started.
Definitely.
So is there any questions, maybe things I need, maybe tools I should showcase off or anything that you guys are curious about?
Yeah, I'd love to know also just from the chat if people have questions.
Oh, sure, yeah.
I'm also curious if people in the chat have gone ahead to download and install Kodu. It is completely free. And I've always been impressed with it. And I like the logic aspect. So, for me, it's often about giving my kids choice in what tool they use. And this is always an option. I haven't been teaching it formally or having all kids use it, but it's definitely out there. So Brad downloaded it. I think he and his son are going to be playing later, I'm sure.
Nice.
Yep. And Ms. Lee says, this is awesome. Thank you. So you were talking about like racing games and stuff. And I guess you could then easily build up, like I'm seeing this level right here, and it just looks like you could create that. How about things like something like a simple mechanism where if we did make a racing game where it counted laps because you had to finish 3 laps and then indicated the winner, like something like that?
Yeah. So typically when I do that, that's definitely possible. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you kind of like the coding behind how that would look like. It's one of the most common questions that I get from my students. The coding behind it is not as complicated as you would think. I just need to designate a block for like my finish line, or like a patch of ground that when I pass it, it would have that counter.
Right.
So I'm just going to make it look like this real quick.
Okay.
So let's say I have a racing character. I'm just going to do the cycle, and I go on the programming. So when we think about it, we want this to trigger basically when I step on this block, right? Yeah. So when I look at that from a programming aspect, I say, well, when, and we actually have to go to the more. It's not when I'm on land, that looks specifically like that block I want to be that trigger point. Yep. So when I'm on land that looks like that, what do I want to do? And you can set this up to where I can go into game and I add like a score to keep count of my laps, or the most common thing my kids want to do is they just want to win. So I can set it up so like as soon as I'm on land that looks like that, I win. So like if I got to set up just movement real quick to get them to move. So now when I play the game and I hit that finish line, I win.
Yes, awesome. So, and then the counter thing I'm guessing would be like, so you set the score at the beginning to 0, you add 1 when I go over it. And then if I go over, each time I go over it, I add 1. And then if I hit 3, I win. The only thing I'm just thinking about how so many of these games work where if I'm working like a lot of things, if I am touching that red block, the score is going to keep going up by 1, by 1, by 1, by 1.
Right.
Is this intuitive enough that it says, wait a minute, I probably don't want to give the person 1,000,000 points, just want to give them the 1. Like, do you then, okay.
So what you can do, and I'm going to just change instead of winning, I'm going to go in here. So if I add a score and let's say I'm going to do a private score of score A is going to go 1 point, and I can say once. So whenever this condition is hit, it's only going to have it once. So if I take it out,
that's good,
and I run over this, I'm going to get like so many points.
Yeah. And I guess you'd have to display the points as another object or something.
Yeah, there's a way to. I think it's in the settings to do that.
So it does that once. That's great. And then if you trying to think like, so if you were going around laps, like let's say 3 laps, would it? I'm just trying to think when it would reset. That it would. If you've already done it once, how do you then get the second point, the second lap? I'm just trying to think that through.
So I believe what happens is it'll trigger and the once will describe things for you. So it will do it after once each time that condition is met.
Oh, okay.
So when I go on that block, it triggers once, and it's not going to trigger until I get off of that block and get back on it.
Right. Now, I guess you might be able to cheat and go past it and turn around and come back for the second score, but there are probably ways to troubleshoot that as well.
Yeah. So, and that's actually a great point, because I get kids that say that all the time, where they're like, well, Mr. G, what's what's preventing me from just like making a circle and looping and touching in a bunch, you know? And so we have a conversation, and I'm like, well, this happens to be like a game design problem. So how could you tweak your game design into forcing only passing over it rather than being able to loop around it? So that forces the student to get creative to where maybe I want to add some kind of wall system, or maybe I want to add like some kind of hill system to where the finish line is at the top of the ramp and I jump off the ramp to a lower level.
That's a good idea. Yeah.
So there are a lot of game design elements that
you
have to think of in consideration to tweak it and get it to work how you want.
Yeah, you got me thinking too, because you could then have the one where you get the point, and then right when you go past it, you get one that maybe after you go over it, you can't go back, like it's blocked. But that's cool. That's the way to do it. You're absolutely right.
Yeah, like cool. if I set up kind of like a loop and let's say I spend the time to really flesh out my hill, so it goes down the ramp and then back up the ramp. So it eliminates, like, I can't simply just roll over this a bunch because I'm going to fall off the edge, right? So a lot of that design thinking also refers back to, you know, those principles of game design, to where if I can't, if the programming doesn't necessarily allow for like that complex of tweaking, how do I, as a game designer, tweak it to where I force my player to only be able to hit this once when I roll over it, and then I have to basically go through that whole track loop again before I get the opportunity to get back there.
Great point. And who doesn't love hitting the lap and then flying off and having to land on the lower track anyway?
Yeah, exactly. So, and the kids love that when I put that in perspective for them. They're like, oh yeah, I'll just make this huge ramp so they can't go back up.
That's
and I'm
great.
Like, there you go. And that's just what you do. So that's how I know those wheels are turning with the kids once they're like, oh yeah, we're totally going to do that now.
Yeah. What I love about this too, because this is so in line with my style of like teaching and stuff, is because of the interface and things, so much of it, you know, you hit that plus button and you start thinking, okay, what do I want it to do? And you can easily explore and search around and say, okay, I want this. Oh, okay, so there's where the score is and stuff. And, you know, that it does seem pretty intuitive. And because it's, you know, made with the lens of making games, it has so many of those things built in, like score and lives and all those different things, but yet you're still engaging in computational thinking to make it all happen. So
yes,
it's great.
That's what I love about it. The most, being computer science for elementary, you know, one of my biggest things and challenges is I like to spread out what all this looks like in the eyes of students. So one of the things I really look at is what kind of computational things does this particular program offer? And also, what does that UI look like? Because one of my biggest things, and I'm shocked when you look at like CSTA and some of the standards that they really want you to hone in on, is it doesn't really mention much about UI. And I think UI is so important as far as just getting kids to understand all the different elements a UI can actually have.
Yeah.
That I feel like it's almost a disservice if we don't use all these different kinds of creativity tools so we can show them and have them understand what all these UI elements really do.
Yeah, it's also neat because it deals with logic, but like we're becoming so used to, say, block-based environments, and it's very different, you know, than that. And like, I also like Game Maker because of the way the logic is used there, and it emulates, you know, computer programming things. So I do think that's kind of neat. Yeah, I think it's, the other thing I was going to ask is, what about when it comes to publishing games to the community? Is that a fairly easy process? And you know, and when kids log in, or is it pretty good about, you know, student privacy and things like that?
So I believe so. And in fact, let's just demo this real quick. I typically won't, because I'm all about privacy, and we do like once we're done with all this process, we do like an arcade day, so everybody gets a chance to go around, and we tie that into leaving positive feedback too. So we don't necessarily use the share with community, but I'm almost positive what I did see of it is good about privacy. So if I go with share community, it says your world has been posted. You can visit it here at the website or by browsing my worlds on the community screen.
Right. And then I guess I wonder how other people see it then, if it's, in other words, I'm going to go check. So you just posted one. I'm just going to see if there's an easy way. Let's see. Now I have to figure out how to get out of the game. All right, home maybe? There we go. Exit to main menu. Oops. All right. It's funny. This, just like Minecraft, calls everything New World at first. So I want to go to the community now. My World's lessons samples all. Okay, so it's searching right now. Oh, Mr. G, you're there because I guess yours is recent. I wonder, I guess there are other ways than later to filter and things. I mean, I can, let's see if I knew.
There's a question from the chat, Chris. Can you save a world file locally on a hard drive?
Yes. If you go to Save My World.
Yeah.
This will be the way to do it. And you press save anyway. So that will save it locally. Now to find it is a little bit of a challenge, and I don't know why, because they do such a good job of really describing how all this stuff works and where everything's at. I don't know why they make it challenging to figure out where this is actually saved. Yeah, I believe if you go to the website, they have a little guide of where to find this exactly in your hard drive where it's saved. But you have to go to the website and find those directions. That's like the one thing, like, I don't know why they struggled to be able to put that information inside Kodu itself.
Sure.
But
save as.
All the directions are on Kodu's website. They tell you exactly how to go about finding the file.
And you had mentioned before, and this answers the other question about OneDrive, is once you have that file, it's just one file. So if you upload that to Google Drive or OneDrive, you can do that. And then another comment that was made, which I just want to address, was the idea, which we discussed earlier, is that it reminded one of our viewers of Project Spark. And they are it's the same company. They're both Microsoft. Project Spark was a beautiful environment that had so much potential and for some reason was abandoned. But fortunately, they did not abandon Kodu, which I guess maybe they felt they had a better infrastructure all around for or something, and maybe the user base. So I would love to see more people using it. I feel like it's probably still underutilized for the fact that it's free and it's been around for so long. So
it's kind of like that hidden gem in the desert. You know what I mean? Because it has been around so long. And honestly, like, Microsoft could do a better job of still promoting it.
Absolutely.
Because I mean, I've checked their Twitter page off, and maybe gets updated once a year. You know what I mean?
Right. So, well, maybe we could rally behind it as a group of educators that want to see it. The more,
I would love to do that because there is a lot here for everybody, from game design to computational thinking.
Absolutely.
So this is just like a huge field of what is possible and what you can do. Like I said, there are things that you can design, experiences that don't necessarily have to be tied to games, just like you can do in Minecraft.
Right. Oh, absolutely.
Like you can have a mini math lesson in here if you wanted. You could teach them about science, like with the Mars rover experience that the team made. I mean, there is a lot here that can aid with that whole storytelling aspect of
for sure. We did have, I was just gonna say, we had one question though, real quick, from Brad. There was a print code for level button.
Yes.
What does that bring us like just kind of a list of all the scripts for the whole game or something? Or
so what it will actually do is basically everything you see on the programming, you can print it out and have it on a paper in front of you.
Okay.
So if you wanted to just see all the code that it took to make the game, let's say we're really focusing on the sequential process that student had to go through. I can print the code out for the entire world and have it in front of me and go through it with the student so they can understand, why they might be earning the marks that they are, depending on whatever your goals are for the project in Kodu that you're doing. Maybe you're focusing on certain aspects of computational thinking, and you want to go through that with the student and identify where they nailed it and did a good job, or maybe they struggled and what we kind of need to go back and focus on.
Cool.
Awesome.
But you can just as easily, if you want to save some trees, you can just as easily have the student save it and put it into the Google Drive. Let's say you have a class Google Drive where all these projects are. They actually do a really neat thing that you can click on that file and it will automatically launch Kodu for you and load you right into that world directly by just opening their game file. So I thought that was a real neat thing. Like, I didn't have to go to home and load and navigate through a bunch of windows. I could just directly open that save file and it will launch Kodu for me and put me right into that world right away.
Cool. Well, we gotta get going. We could probably keep talking all day if we wanted to, I'm sure. But it is 10 a.m. and everyone's got to start their days sometime. And so let's go do that. We'll be back this afternoon. Steve and I started a Minecraft hardcore world, and we are going to continue playing Minecraft hardcore. And it's funny how much you learn about Minecraft playing Minecraft hardcore. So I've got a lot of good feedback on it, and that they were learning how to play Minecraft in a totally different way by playing or watching us play hardcore. Unscripted, 1:00 this afternoon with Brad, and I think I'm joining him to talk about the show and what we're going to be doing on it, what he's going to be doing on it. He is the host. So that's it for this morning. Thank you, Chris.
Yeah, thanks
for joining
Chris.
us. Thanks for talking about Kodu. This was a great morning. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day, and we will see you this afternoon. Bye now.
Bye-bye, everybody.